Hi, Wael. Welcome
Hi.
to Guatemala. Thanks for joining us here at College Freedom Forum at UFM.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is Wael Ghonim. I'm 38 years old, technology professional. I became an activist about 10 years ago when I took part into a movement that helped spark the Egyptian revolution and bring down Hosni Mubarak, who ruled the country for 30 years. I've also, like, in my professional career, I've worked for Google. I did a startup and sold it to a company named Quora, and I worked for Quora for a little bit. I am married. I have two kids. My daughter is 15 and my son is 10, Adam and Isra.
So, could you tell us a little bit about what you've learned since the Arab Spring in 2011?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've unlearned a lot of stuff. And I think that's actually one of the things that I've learned, which is it's very critical to always look in the past and try and see what have you got wrong. So the way I see things now is, like, in the past, as an activist, I started my activism with a lot of anger and frustration, and it all started from, like, what's wrong with reality, what is happening with reality that I was not accepting reality. And what I realized is that eventually one need to have the wisdom to accept reality, accept it as it is because it is reality, but then figure out what's wrong or what's unrealistic with their expectations. And it's only when you go into this internal journey that you would be much more effective in trying to change reality. A lot of people are very delusional. Their expectations of what is reality is distorted by their emotions. They are very angry, and imagine, like, at home, like, when you're extremely angry, what do? Are you making good decisions? Not really. You always make decisions that create more problems for yourself. So that was, like, the biggest thing I learned, because I think that life is much better and you are much more effective in trying to inspire change within your circles or within your country when you are much more in tune with reality, when you know what you are doing, and you accept what is happening and you can actually read into it. And one of the things I noticed about myself and about a lot of fellow activists after the events in 2011, which were enormous events, was that a lot of us were just so delusional. We just didn't see reality for what it is, and we kept completely getting more and more disappointed, to the point that we became completely ineffective. So I go back now and I look at myself and I'm like, there are certain things that I need to do. One is, like, always update my expectations to match reality. Always understand, like, what are some rules, principles, ideas, absence of certain information or information sources that are creating the gap between reality and expectations.
That's an incredibly wise answer.
Thank you.
I guess my segue question would be, what does activism with this kind of learning look like?
I actually like to think there's some part of me that feels uncomfortable with the word activist, because it kind of establishes that I'm different than you. I'm different. If you identify yourself as something that many others are not identifying themselves as, you are innocently creating a gap between you and others. And we like words because they kind of make. I think the word activist, the way I think of activism, is both an intention and an action plan to try and change reality for better. And with this definition, it's so big that a government official is an activist. Someone a professor at university is an activist. A student that is trying to change certain rules within the university is an activist. So in a sense, we're all activists. There are just some of us that gets the label, and unfortunately, some of us are also like think activism is anger. Which I don't think so. I think everybody could easily become an angry person, but there are very few people who actually, rather than spend their energy into their anger, they spend their energy into making things better for everyone. So the way I look at activism is like, how can I be helpful beyond my own self-interest? How can I do something within the system that changes the rules and conditions and make people more empower more people to have more power, to kind of like align the interests. The real problem in the world has been always that there are very few people with a lot of power, and a lot of masses who don't have that much power. And the journey of activism is to align the interest, like making sure that power distributes across people, because we already know that it is a human behavior that the more power you aggregate, the more likely you're going to try and clinch into that power. And sometimes you do that by taking, kind of taking agency out of people. And activism is a job of like trying to bring agency back to the people.
So I think that maybe you agree with me that back in 2011 we everybody had a lot of hopes for social media, and maybe after we've seen that the Russians and other people have interfered in some elections and some events in creating all this fake news, maybe we've lost some of that optimism. What do you think is the role of social media nowadays? And
I think we were very emotional at the very beginning when we saw the amazing things thrive out of social media. I have this one quote. It's like, if you want to liberate a society, give them the internet. And I think that was a very naive view, now in retrospect, because internet, just like any other things, is just a tool. Give that tool to the bad guy, or not the bad guy. Give that tool to people who want to use it for bad things, and they will effectively use it. And actually, the economies of using it for bad things is much better than the economies of using it for good things. So, for instance, I'm morally bounded by I'm not gonna lie to my audience, because how can I manipulate people if I'm in a journey to give them back their agency? I'll just be like another manipulator trying to aggregate power. So what I have personally learned through this journey is to think of tools as tools, and think of tools as ways where not only you want to leverage to create more opportunities for better agency for people, but also think of them as critical systems that need to have checks and balances. And in absence of checks and balances, what is most likely to happen is someone gonna come in and hack into these systems and use them for their own benefits. Right now, one of the biggest challenges, and I think a lot about that, I wrote about that a little bit, and I'm also like talking to a lot of politicians and activists and people in the tech industry, is that the algorithmic nature of social media, like when you open your news feed and see all these stories, they come to you because there is software in the background that basically tries to make decisions on what you should see. The real challenge here is that the software makes decisions based on how emotionally engaged you get. And the problem is, like just how I was saying, if we let ourselves into our emotions, we tend to make our subconscious mind lead. We're not using reason. Therefore, stories that kind of like exploit you to become more fearful, to become more angry, to shame others, to be ashamed, to feel guilty, all these kind of stories are much more emotionally engaging. So we just build platforms that creates a scale, anti-reason platforms. If you write something that is reasonable, objective, in your view, because of course, like in someone else's view, it's going to be unreasonable. But in your view, if you write in a very moderate tone, most likely you're not going to get enough engagement, and therefore you're not going to get distribution. So social media platforms are training people to be more emotionally outraged, including like even media organizations, like news stories now, they have to have like very like clickbaity titles. You have to exaggerate reality. But the reality is, for us to progress in the world without friction or with the minimum amount of friction, we need to be as close as possible to reality. We cannot be delusional. And these platforms right now are creating delusion at scale.
So we now, I want to ask you, if we gave you a magic wand and you could change anything about the world, what would that be?
Um, I wish the world works works like that. That would be actually I don't, because if I get that magic wand, someone else is gonna get it, and then we don't know what's gonna happen. I think like what I'm hoping for is that in the past decade, humans started understanding the power of emotional exploitation and the power of appealing to people's emotion to get them make decisions that are not reasonable. So it's kind of like if you look at the international stage, politics became more like drama. Politicians are actors who are just buying votes, and the way they buy votes is by emotionally engaging people. I would say to a large extent, emotionally exploiting people. Hope, fear, change, all these sound bites, and people are not discussing policies. And then what happens is that we created a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've been doing that for decades. And if you try and say, let's move from that world into an era where politicians are being selected more meritocratically, there's some merit, they're experts, they know what they're doing. People tell you, no, that's not how it's working. Human behavior is not like that. And I completely disagree with that. I actually think that we have had so many things in our human behavior that was conditioned by systems. So, for example, look at how the marriage institutions organized how humans mate and procreate. And we have systems and laws to penalize people who have aggression and so on. So there is a way to alter such a behavior or modulate it, but it's just that we're not working on that. So if I get that magic wand, it would be that that we kind of like penalize emotional exploitation, make it disgusting, make the norm of whomever practices that be seen as a con artist, because that's what they are, right? Like they just go into the masses of people and emotionally charge them and get them hyped. And then give them flawed logic to distort their view of reality. And I told you I have 2 kids. I always tell my kids, when you're watching some serious content and there's background music playing in the back, just make sure to isolate that background music from the content you are watching. Why? Because if you do not do that, your subconscious mind is just becoming much more fearful or much more hopeful than it should be, and therefore your ability to reason and question the content that's coming to you becomes much less. So I'm hoping for a more reasonable world, and that doesn't mean I don't want an emotional world. Like emotions are so important in making our decisions. Like I go a lot by my intuition. It's just that as much as I use my intuition to guide my reason, I also try a lot to use my reason to guide my emotions.
Great. So thank you, Wael. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us, and we hope you have a great time at the College Freedom Forum.
Thanks for having me, and you guys have an awesome university. I'm just like impressed by how beautiful the campus is.